Hey,
welcome.
We have two of our fucking favorite people in the whole goddamn world with us. And if I may speak just a little bit like inside baseball on it all, two people who have been such massive fucking influences on my personal world and in anyone who knows Mary's in our world, because you guys shaped what fucking 3/4 of the experience in our venues is, which is the drinking. So welcome to the fucking party, fuckfaces, Mike, Bennie, and Giorgio DeMaria. How you guys doing?
Yeah, we're real good. That's a lot of energy, Jake.
Yeah, that's where we need to be.
Yeah, used to it.
I'm feeling
Gonna get worse.
We just spent like 5 minutes.
More.
We just spent 5 minutes off camera and off record going, what do we need to do? We've all been drinking for hours already. Well, let's just admit we're all fucking pretty drunk. We're all fucking pretty under the weather. Let's just get into it.
Okay, you speak for yourself.
He told us that. He said the other day that you're packing. Mike's not living a life of sobriety, but picking his battles, shall we say?
Yeah,
Is this a battle?
Well, he's picked July as the battle.
Did you pick this battle?
Well, I did put it off for a while because obviously we're living under the yoke of COVID era lifestyle, and as you would know, I took 2.5 months off drinking at the start of it through the period of.
You didn't get less annoying. No. I get less annoying when I don't drink.
But it certainly it was an interesting thing for me, and obviously the last 4 weeks I've had some Olympic level drinking, which has been a change of pace. But coming.
Can you frame what Olympic level drinking is? Because I think most people going to go, I drank a lot last night. They don't quite understand what real Olympic level drinking looks like. Can you frame it out for us, please?
Well, look, I'm 19 years old. Just take a look at me. This is the way it works.
Yeah.
But
all of us haven't hit our quarter fucking life crises yet.
Yeah, true.
A bottle of absinthe to finish off the night the other weekend.
Yeah, on a quiet weekend away from home. That's true.
How many standard drinks is a proper night for Mike, Bennie, and Giorgio?
Yeah, look, it's terrifying. I think I'll speak for Giorgio as well. But when lunch goes to 4 or 5 a.m., you're looking at 30 drinks plus. And I know that doesn't sound like too much, but when you declare that to a doctor and they ask you, what's your drinking pattern like? And I'm really.
But hang on, 30 drinks sounds to me like that's a number that I would tell a doctor to not make them fucking faint, but not actually what happened in a 15-hour drinking session.
Yeah.
Well, we had it the other week. We did one of the empty room things. We had a few gin and sodas or whatever, maybe a bottle of wine, and then we drank a bottle of whiskey through it all, and then everyone else sort of disappeared, and then Jake and I just wanted to sort of, I don't know, touch on a couple of topics, and we had another bottle of whiskey. So we drank 2 bottles of whiskey plus a bottle of wine plus some gin, and you think about it, that's disgusting.
It is, and I think part of the culture of how we live and breathe is a slightly kind of disgusting reality in a way. Like the sobriety stuff for me for that 2.5 months, which I do periods of time of abstinence just to kind of recheck my own psyche and my own mental health and strength and well-being. But when I came back to drinking, I kind of became aware of the kind of grossness of the way we treat ourselves in a way. I'm not trying to be heavy at the start of this.
Well, you're coming off pretty fucking heavy, cunt.
I know, but there's a heroic.
That's why you don't stop. I never do breaks.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Giorgio once said to me, and I think this is something that resonates through my mind a lot when I think about consumption. He said to me, "You don't drink well," and I remember this very strongly because I do have this issue with not drinking well, where I don't revere and think and consider what's in front of me at times, where it's just a beverage to facilitate an altered mind state. I poison myself with pretty shit, and that's what I do. And at times it's kind of quite confronting and makes me quite upset with myself, which is not necessarily the way we started off with this.
What a fucking way to start a podcast! Hey, hello everybody. Welcome to the podcast.
Cut. Yeah.
Can we have 4 espresso, 1 magnum, 1 champagne, and 4 shots of whiskey, please?
Yeah, that's right. That's a lunch a long time ago.
Well, let's launch into that sort of end of the topic towards the end, Mike, because I feel like we're all in agreement that we're probably right there right now, but we've got some ground to cover between now and then.
True.
And I'm, without trying to get too inquisitive, there's a bunch of people who have pushed play on this podcast for a variety of reasons. And surprisingly, they have your story as at the top of their list of things they want to explain. So I'd love to ask the question of how the fuck did you two meet?
Uh-huh.
how, and maybe you guys can approach this separately for a little bit about like how.
Why Georgia's here.
Giorgio, how did you get into? How did you end up in Australia? How did you both of you end up in wine? How is your world about wine? And we'll let you guys talk for a little bit, and we'll just interject with like uninteresting.
Was it a meeting of minds, or was it a fuck? I hate that cunt, but it just kind of grew on each other.
No, this is a love that dare not speak its name. You know, this is definitely a love that dare not speak its name. If you want the story of how we met, it was obviously through work climate, and I had sort of unyoked myself from the corporate fine wine job that I was in, where I was servicing clients that was as diverse as Goldman Sachs through to Mallisons. These are law firms and banks, you know, high-end net worth individuals who buy heaps of fancy fine wine.
And good wine or wine that
wine.
you disagreed with at some point?
Well, no, this is the interesting thing is that my boss, when I first started in the wine industry, I was a latent lawyer. I was becoming a lawyer and thinking that law was the pathway for myself. And I stumbled into a job driving van and filling fridges in a fine wine merchant. I had no idea about wine. My first job interview was literally, what's your experience in the wine industry? And I said, I once drank a 3/4 of a 4-litre bag of goon and spewed it up in a park. Does that count? And they said, there's the door. And I said,
sounds like the hiring policy across the board.
That's a Mary's hiring.
And PMV, yeah.
So I walked back into the job about a month later when I allegedly was late to work and didn't even know I had a job, and spent the next 10 years in the fine wine merchant.
We met in the door to the staff room.
I wasn't sure what was going on.
You dickhead.
Yeah.
You failed twice.
But I got the job and I worked in this fine wine merchant. But the person who owned the business, a guy called David Matters, who I think is an uncredited hero in the Australian wine industry for doing a lot of different things. I won't necessarily get into that, but I ended up doing corporate fine wine and top-end wine stuff. So I had to learn a lot about the world of very conventional but also diverse wine that exists in the universe. But very early on, he had me, questioning what I was doing and asked me to kind of do things that were outside of my comfort zone. He sent me off to do a harvest in 2005, midway through my tenure.
Where was that?
It was at Deepwoods Estate with Ben Gould, who has become Blind Corner, which is the largest organic.
How old was he then? He looks like he's about 28 now.
He was 12, but he so it's okay. I was there.
He was like the Fred Savage of the wine world.
That's right. I was supervising. Like, what's Mike going to do next? But
you were supervising.
I went over to Deepwoods Estate, and my boss gave me half pay for 3.5 months and asked me to go and learn about the production methods of wine. And I went from pre-harvest through to bench blends at the end. And the whole way through, I was responsible for building up cultured yeast. I was adding tannin. I was adding acid to ferments. And as a kind of person who'd been quite layman in the wine industry, I kept asking him, why are you doing this? Like, don't the grapes do it for themselves? And I was being a bit of an idiot, but it led me down a pathway that questioned a lot about
Did they
wine.
make you feel like an idiot when you asked such obviously natural questions?
They were very good to me. They sort of treated me like patted me on the head and said, good boy, keep asking, but we're going to do this. The interesting thing is that I think that those questions began to resonate with the two winemakers. It was Ben and his younger brother. It was just three of us running a very large wine facility at the time. And obviously Ben's life has changed dramatically at Blind Corner, and he's become a very strident and very high-profile natural winemaker. I'm not going to take credit for that, but I think that the genesis of the conversations we had during that 2005 harvest would probably be somewhat seismic in his journey along the way. But anyway, soon after that, my boss, when I came back, said, look, we work quite heavily with New Zealand wine. It was a big thing in Australia at the time. He said to me, let's go over to New Zealand and source a portfolio of wine that focuses on artisan producers who are organic. And I ended up having to go and do that by myself, which is a whole other story. But he basically sent me on a course that was looking only at natural wine producers in New Zealand. So things like Pyramid Valley, who became a totem for natural wine in New Zealand, they were just planting in the ground. I went back every year, even though they had no wine. I just hung out with them. I looked at their vineyard. I spent a couple of days with them. They became great friends. Down the road was Bell Hill, similar sort of setup. Mount Edward in central Otago. I'd visit Ripon, and I started seeing all these producers doing things in New Zealand that I wasn't aware of in Australia.
Was it called natural wine at that point, Mike?
Look, it was in other parts of the world, and I think I didn't...
Was one of those parts of the world Italy?
It might have been. Was it, Giorgio?
I'm not sure. It's just called winemaking there.
But sorry to interrupt you. Your backtrack there, Mike, but just to bring Giorgio in on that, there's that whole thing, in we call it natural wine. You know, in France or Italy, we just call it wine. Like, was it just called wine for you when you were growing up, Giorgio, or is there a distinct category that's emerged from the same sort of style and the same sort of story that Mike's got, or is it really different?
I think it's different because my first experience with natural wine was mind blowing because I've been drinking wine since I was 8 or 9. A little bit of wine in the glass with the water. My dad, and my family always source wine locally in Damijon, bottling for winter. So wine has always been a normal thing to drink, but I don't know if that was natural wine. In my first experience was when I was probably 19, and I went to a shop in Turin, and I asked for a bottle of wine. I was gonna make a dish with artichokes, and I said I find artichokes very difficult to match with wine. And this guy gave me a bottle of Radicon.
Oh, really?
And that was very long
How
time
old
ago.
were you?
I was 19.
And so this is
2 years ago.
This is 2 years ago.
to give everyone who's currently sipping on a bottle of Pet Nat some perspective about what natural wine actually is. How actually long ago was that? Over 20 years ago, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Radicon's never stopped making wine the way they've been making wine since when?
Well, Radicon was making wine very differently then, but
Oh, really?
yes, there was no skin contact. They were very different wines, but still.
But the farming
method's
method's the same.
Farming method has always been the same, yeah. So if I'm not wrong, it's probably with 2001 that they started
Doing the skin fermentation.
the skin
about then.
fermentation. About then,
The
What,
vineyard-
and what's
But-
it? Sorry to derail. What brought them to that point to start doing skin? Is skin contact in you guys' minds a new methodology that was adapted?
it's part new.
We're
in
playing
terms
inside
of-
baseball here like a
I know,
motherfucker.
This is jumping around all over the place.
Let's
I'd
go.
say. Yeah.
a lot.
So, yes and no. I mean, in terms of its current vogue, yes, it's very much new. But no, I mean, if you look back to the history of wine in general, wine was always fermented on its skins because grapes give everything to a wine that will preserve it and give it the life and energy that it needs to go through a season to be drunk over a year by the time you get to the next harvest. I mean, effectively, the outer layer of a grape has tannin and phenolics that preserve. Acid inside a grape is a preservative if you think about pickling, and fermentation in itself is a preservative process. It's a preserving process. So no, this is old methodology. What happened in Friuli was for Radicon wines are from Friuli in the northeast of Italy, is that if you use Radicon as the litmus test, and they're part of a culture that's broader than Radicon itself, in the 1920s, 1930s, when Radicon's Stanko Radicon, who was the third generation, his grandfather was planting the vineyard in the 20s and 30s. He planted the traditional grape variety of Ribera Gialla only in his vineyard, with the idea of producing wines for the farm. 1948 was when they started expanding the vineyard, and they thought about creating more, sellable products with a different style of winemaking, kind of lost it until the 1990s. But during this period, you've got 2 world wars that decimated all the information about the old winemaking in Friuli. All the men in the region were called up to war. They were all killed pretty much. All the villages were decimated, destroyed. All the wineries were razed to the ground. And so you had no knowledge. So it took until the 1990s when Stanko Radicon, the kind of godfather of Friuli's natural wine movement, alongside Josko Gravner and Edie Kant, reassessed how they would start making wine off the back of 3 seasons in a row that were terrible. Frost, hail, other sorts of pestilence.
Sorry, you just call Eddie a Kant.
Whoops. Yeah, maybe.
Is he?
But the idea that all of a sudden they were back to ground zero, which their forebearers had been at after the wars, when there was nothing left, no information, no wineries, the vineyards were, flattened by bombs and war. They suddenly thought to themselves, well, we've got nothing, so what do we refer back to? We refer back to the old knowledge. And all of a sudden they were thinking, well, how do we keep wine going without chemicals? How do we make wines that will last a season? How do we make wines that might last a little bit longer? And they started experimenting using the older winemaking techniques that their great grandfathers and grandfathers were using.
How were they passed down? Were they passed verbally only?
Verbally, exactly. Yeah, there was no books. There's no formal education in this part of the world. It's an agricultural pursuit.
Yeah, but basically the industry in 50 years cancelled the history of hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So it took people like Gravner, like Radicon to kind of restore it back. But by saying that though, like, it's also the spirit of innovation. Like if you think of Gravner was the first person to introduce new barrique in Friuli.
And stainless steel tanks.
And stainless steel tank.
Just explain that for people quickly.
Okay, my job. So Josko Gravner, or Grauner as his name is actually
Quickly.
No pressure, mate.
Winemaker guy decides that he wants to commercialize the industry in Friuli. How do you do that? You bring in methods of production that speed up the process. Therefore, if you have in the ground something like Pinot Grigio, which is a red grape, you crush the grapes, throw away the skins, ferment the clear juice in stainless steel tanks with temperature control and yeast that makes that process fast. And you bottle it very quickly and you have a light, fresh white that the world loves. And all of a sudden, these wines from Friuli that were, quite agricultural in their sort of feel suddenly became very modern in their feel. And the world was like, wow, we can get light, fresh white wines 45 minutes from Trieste, this seaside village on the northeast coast of Italy. Fuck yeah. And so Gravner was at the forefront of this. But at some point, he had an epiphany and said, I don't like this. I don't like what I'm doing. And between him and his mate up the road, Radicon, the other buddy down the road, Edie Kant, they thought to themselves, how do we bring back tradition into this area and speak more fluently about the culture of the place we live in? Well, we'll eradicate that and go back to the old methods that we've been taught by the vocal tradition from elders from this place. And so they took away the stainless steel tanks. Grauner decided he would travel to Georgia and looked at amphora. Radicon eschews the idea that amphora are a good idea for wine. He likes large format, very large barrique, which are made from Slovenian oak, and that's how he traditionally found his wines were being produced.
I love this idea of the split.
Yeah, so all of a sudden you had this diametric culture. There was a lot of people in Friuli dialing into this speedy process, mass culture, mass market wine styles, and these guys pulled back. But during these three vintages, we had these cataclysmic episodes in vineyards where they could barely produce wine. That's when they went back to the old tradition. They said, right, we're done. It's about 1995 or something, 1996 or something like that.
But, traditionally there would definitely be, if you go back 60, 70 years ago, there would be definitely skin contact and they would use barrel made with everything that you find around. So
anything you find.
Acacia, chestnut, everything that
Cherry.
grows around you, cherry.
Is there
all this
anyone
sort of
making
stuff.
wine that haphazardly? Like with acacia, cherry wood, like not really?
Now there is Princic. Dario Princic is going back to sourcing local essence of wood around the area, and he's got a cooper making barrel for him in Slovenia.
That, yeah.
If I may just say, this conversation is so fucking incredible.
Thanks, Jake. This is a great podcast now.
So good.
You've given us
Just because
validity.
this is this kind of stuff.
Check us that soda, Jake.
The what?
The soda, please.
Soda.
Soda for Sir.
Because this is the exact stuff that is missing in when someone sips on a fucking bottle of orange wine and they don't understand the fucking history of the way it lays. I just want to go fucking so deep and totally inside baseball on this for the rest of the podcast. Is that okay with you guys? Because I wasn't kind of the way that we were ending it up, like starting it out. We're like, let's talk about fucking like the things you guys have created. But I'm just such a fan of this, the reality of where we're actually at. Because if anyone's fucking interested in what natural wine is, you ain't going to get two people in a fucking room who can speak about it fluently and as easily as this. So if it's cool with you guys, can we can just pretend like everyone's got the assumed knowledge and not like, and you know what? If you don't have the assumed knowledge, go fucking research it. Because I want to nerd out because I'm learning something and I find this really deeply interesting.
You can do what you like, Jake. This is literally
It's my podcast.
your room and podcast.
Well, I share it with Kenny.
Well,
I wanted to talk to you guys about how you met and why you hate each other so much. But
Well, we can go there now.
there is that. And
A valid
obviously-
question answered.
Yeah. Well, look, there is no hate.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
You fucking know about
I
it.
planted a few questions. Look, I mean, if you want to jump down that pathway, this is obviously
Let's jump in and out.
a skittish interview. We like it. It's good. Giorgio
I'm
and
glad you approve.
Yeah.
Like you've got a fucking choice.
True. Giorgio and I formed our relationship over a bond at 121 BC, which Giorgio was the...
It was probably my first customer.
Yeah, and
Really?
I came in all the time.
But can
Like at
I
9 in the
can I
morning.
ask can I
Hammered.
Yeah.
can I
As-
ass-
When
as
the bar
always.
wasn't open.
can I
yet,
make
only
an
the
assumption about why he was your first customer? Can I ask a question about who Mike Bennie was to you before 121 BC opened?
A guy dressed like an adult baby who liked nice wine.
But you guys didn't know each other from Berta? Oh, sorry, not from
Constantly
Berta, from what was the little joint on the corner from 121
Vinny.
BC? Vinny.
Vinny. I think the
You guys
first
didn't
one,
know each other in
I
Vinny
don't think
days?
so.
No.
Like, I think the first
really?
wine I met Mike, he came, he heard about a shop opening in Surrey Hills, a wine shop.
You guys
Because
didn't know
we
each other before 121
No.
BC opened?
No.
That is
No.
a mind-blowing moment for me.
But
Okay,
as
cool.
Giorgio is
Yeah.
about to explain,
Because it opened in 2 stages. 121 BC opened in 2 stages. We opened a shop first for a few months, and then we opened the bar.
Okay.
So Mike was one of the first people to walk in the shop, and they just browse around. And I had bottle of Radicon, a bottle of other Cantina Giardino and stuff like that, and nobody knew anything about. And Mike walked in and started to say, I know this one, I know this one, I know this one. And we started a conversation about that because not many people knew about it. I learned about all that stuff mostly in Japan before coming to Australia.
You learn about these wines in Japan, not in Italy?
I know Cantina Giardino, Panevino from Japan.
Wow.
Because in Japan, I worked in Japan for about 1 year, and I worked in a place where I was exposed to all these wines. And
So
I
where are
just
you from
fell in love.
in Italy where are you from in Italy and where are these wines from? Like, are they so far apart?
I mean, yeah. So I'm in the northwest of Italy. I'm from Torino, but at the time there was no places or bars or restaurant that was massively serve this wine. So I think we need to give Japan the credit
Yeah.
that if they didn't support all these producers would not exist today
Yeah.
because nobody was buying these wines.
That's a fucking mind. Like I've
We heard
been
that
in
so
deep
much,
with you guys, so I've been in deep in this world for a long time, and this is something that I've never been aware of.
the aesthetic and the...
I thought Giorgio
I thought it
came
was. That it's
to Sydney, so I knew that natural wine was a big
Yeah,
thing in
yeah.
Japan.
Yeah, for sure.
I didn't realize that one of the major importers of this stuff, and I'm not talking importers as in product, but importers of ideology, of concept, of ideas, didn't bring it like from Italy directly. You bought it via Japan.
Yeah, so I tried all this wine in Japan, and then I went to and did a massive trip in Italy for 3 months, where I traveled Italy for 3 months, and I started to go and visit everyone, put all my contact together, and that was my kind of background. But I was inspired by a guy I met in Ireland before I went to Japan, in Dublin. This guy used to do like 6 months trip in France. He was a young French guy going around and just visit producer. And I just thought, why should I try to learn this stuff from the books when you can travel and taste and speak with the producers? And that's where most of my knowledge come. Of course, I got all the wine courses done and all of that, but my experience comes from the ground.
Same. That's identical pathway. The reason why I recognized wines in 121 BC when it was a fledgling shop was that after that trip to New Zealand that I was talking about before, I started saying, well, fuck this. I'm going to invest in my own education. I'm not going to do courses. I'm going to spend all my money on travel, try and write stories about it for the magazines I was writing for. But little things like when I went to Radicon, they said, congratulations, you're the 5th Australian that's ever visited us. I mean, it was that kind of thing back then. And when I went to Jura, people were saying, you're Australian? We never see Australians here in Jura. One guy had gone to see Stefan Tissot 5 years before, but before that, I'm not trying to piss in my own pocket, but like all my energy and money was spent on travel to places that I found fascinating as I learnt about this simmering culture of natural wine. So when I walked into 121 BC to meet Giorgio, and he was like, hang on, I thought I was introducing these things to Australia. We both found this kindred spirit because we're probably one of a very few people who kind of got the wines. Andrew Gard, of course, had done a lot of research and had been to a lot of places.
I was going to say, put a number on it, like rough figure speaking, outside of the odd person who might have accidentally found there, but influentially, put a number on it. How many people were talking about the styles of wine you guys were when you found each other in the country?
Well, look, this was at the genesis, I think, of the movement in Australia that coincided with not just Giorgio and I meeting each other and a few other sommeliers who were interested, and the sort of beginning of some independent importers who had been sommeliers before, but also where the natural selection theory group was beginning to find their kind of heat, which was Tom Schobrook, Anton Van Klopper, James Erskine, and Sam Hughes. Yeah. And Sam Hughes was working for an importer and also a bottle shop in Sydney. Sam Hughes, and many people won't know his name, but there's a picture of him above.
We can all pour some wine out for Sam, though.
Okay, great. So there's a picture of Sam Hughes above the fridge in P&V Wine Liquor Merchants in Newtown for a reason, because I think he was probably the most seismic figure of the natural wine movement in Australia, and that he introduced to a lot of people the culture of natural wine in a very different way that Giorgio and I perhaps did. He was a bon vivant and a raconteur and a poet, an artist, a musician, and created these incredible sort of cultures around his activities. And he drew in Tom and Anton and James and showed them some really amazing natural wines that basically kicked off their careers as the kind of godfathers of Australian natural wine. So all this was happening at kind of the same time. And while George and I were fiddling around in Europe, these guys were on grassroots in Sydney.
Making wine
in a warehouse in Rozelle, using ceramic eggs and playing music to the wines and creating art around it and all this sort of stuff, records, these sorts of things. And it was this incredible period of time where there was a lot of energy. And I remember very fondly, and we actually used Vinnie as the home base for it, but probably about a year or two later, Giorgio and I had sat down. We would meet weekly, if not 3 times a week in 121 BC at various times. I'd drop down. I had a little office up the road.
Before you hired me, apparently.
Yeah, exactly. I hate you now, so.
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Yeah. But look, Rootstock did bring out a lot of emotion. We can talk about it in a second. But it's definitely not the case right now. There's a lot of love between us too.
Yeah, literally. You can tell. It's fucking
friendship breeds. Hey?
Yeah.
But it's got to.
Through this period, it was quite, it was a simmering pot. And Giorgio and I were talking to a bunch of people around Sydney saying, we need to do a festival. We're talking about marquees and tents and food and chefs and authors and artists and architects and all this sort of stuff. We're like, we're going to put something together. And we sat down at Vinnie one day with about 20 people, and Giorgio and I brought them all together into a room, and we talked to them all and said, look, who's in for this? We're going to do a natural wine festival, but with food and with chefs and stuff. And out of that 20, about 5 kept with the program. That was me, Giorgio, James Hurd, Matt Young from Black Market Sake, and his partner in Black Market Sake, Linda Wiss. And the 5 of us decided we would actually put this into play. And that was an amazing thing because we'd seen little flickers of this over in Europe of natural wine festivals, but we never wanted ours to be like that. We didn't want to just do a wine fair. It was never like that. And perhaps Giorgio and I's biggest tussle was about the culture of the wine fair versus the kind of general festival we were trying to create. And the word we always used was festival because we wanted to celebrate. It wasn't just about wine. And people around the world started looking at Rootstock as we kind of go through the course of time and going, what the fuck? They raise a live animal through a year, document it on Instagram and slaughter it at the end of the year and then crucify it over coals and cook it over 2 days and have chefs tear it apart. They have music, they have Aboriginal culture involved in this, tea ceremonies, lecture series, and people around the world were like, holy shit, like literally Rootstock became this thing. It was the high watermark for natural wine festivals around the world because it wasn't just about natural wine, it was about everything around it that talks about sustainability, that talks about organic nature of things, that talks about how you should grow and raise stuff, and it became so much bigger. And even the first year we did it was this.
The wine was just a thread that sort of
100%.
Sorted it all together.
Yeah, exactly. And we were always
the wine
like,
is the result of all of this because I still think and that's unfortunately is happening a lot now. Not just in Australia, everywhere. That there is new producer coming up like mushroom everywhere and just making cloudy wine, orange wine, an orange wine is not necessarily a natural wine.
Yes.
A pet nat's not necessarily a natural wine.
It's not about the process, how you make the wine look like. It's everything that comes before that. The way you treat the land, the way you grow your grapes. Because I still believe that if you're making wine, you need to grow your own grapes.
If you allow me to just let's take a zoom out because I think you guys are
Pretty heavy.
No, you guys are narrowing in on somewhere where we all want to get. But let's just zoom out a little bit and take you guys back to because we've skipped a few steps, and I think the vital steps are actually your stories. So, Giorgio, you've been through Japan. You're an Italian man who's
What? I just thought you had a weird accent from Adelaide.
Japanese accent.
Fuck. And
You're
you're from Melbourne, right?
yeah. You're an
Christ.
Italian.
I learned English in Ireland and I perfection it in Japan.
Well, this is kind of the point. You learn about natural wine. You learn about Italian
Do you
natural
understand
wine in Japan. No, what? You learn about Italian natural wine in Japan, but there's something, and I'd like to, if you don't mind, just explain about what you learn about natural wine in Japan that allowed you to connect with what was happening back at home.
Well, it was a combination of these. I was in this little restaurant in a little suburb in Japan called Edogawabashi, and I was there, 20 seats, incredible restaurant, incredible food, like fish and animals of all sorts would come alive to the city, and they would make this incredible food, some of the best Italian food, but with Japanese ingredient and mentality, and to kind of being exposed to wines that were tasting so diverse as the food was, all together just made it very special. And when I started to try all these wines, I started to wonder what a wine is, because the wine I was drinking before, they were very generic. You know, I tried these wines from Cantina Giardino for the first time, and I said, what is this? And then I tried it with some of the food, and I just thought it was fantastic. And that's the reason why wine like these with so much personality have been so successful in Japan, because that's their approach to food as well. You know, they go and search, and they're happy to pay whatever money is needed to be paid for having these incredible prawns from Hokkaido, or like horse from this particular city in Japan. Everything is so specialized, and that's what makes it very similar as well to Italy. You know, you travel like 20K, and there is a completely different product and specialty.
Yeah.
And that's why there is this connection between Japanese cuisine and mentality and Italian cuisine and mentality, in my opinion. And this attention to flavor, to diversity, to uniqueness. And that's what, for me, a natural wine is. It should express the personality of the people behind, along with where they're growing their grapes and making the wine.
The wine's corked?
Yeah, the wine's cooked. Sorry, keep going.
No.
God
Was
damn it.
Keep going.
Was there an element, Giorgio, like, because you know, I mean, I've experienced not in this sort of like the cutting edge of your country's produce as you have, but you know, like the respect you'd given it or perceived, or even the love your own country had for it. You know, did it sort of like you never engage with it fully, and then when you travel abroad, you realize how fucking good it is. So then when you go back with a new level of respect and a new sort of vision for procuring, like, you know, what's there, and teaching the world about it. Like, I've had a bit, I mean, I was lucky enough that we had lunch in Edinburgh a few months back, and, you know, went to like, there's a fancy fish and chip shop down in the Leith or New Haven area now. And it was unreal. Like, this was the Scottish seafood. And when you grow up in Scotland, like, no one eats fucking seafood. Everyone just eats fucking like the shittest food ever, and it's like not realizing it's some of the best in the world. When you go back and go in there and just eating crab claws and eating fucking mussels and razor clams, like, and I had a pint of Guinness, and I was fucking the happiest man alive. And I never had the respect.
But you grew up
for
eating
it.
Hot Pockets.
Yeah, you grew up, fucking eating like turkey scallops and fucking pie and chips and fucking mince and potatoes and shit. But it's like that idea of that idea of just not respecting it, because it was never shown to you. No one ever, you didn't grow up with people saying, this is the best of this shit you're ever going to get. You're just like, this is what we do, or like, oh, we don't even fucking like it that much. We drink French wine, or we drink this wine, or whatever. And it's not till you leave. Because I think, like, I feel that as an expat, like sometimes you're viewed as someone who's perhaps given up on your country. You know, I view it as being some of the greatest ambassadors that our country ever have. Like, how the fuck are people going to learn about you when you're stuck there? Like, when you travel and, you know, spread the good word about my good friend Scotland, it's like a much more powerful thing as opposed to just like sitting there in your backyard going, how fucking good is this, by the way? Like,
I agree, but I can easily say that I learned more about Italy by
traveling.
That experience in Japan especially, that made me travel to Italy with the intention of discovering more about the traditional product, traditional wines, and all of that, which I didn't have before.
Had you traveled the country much, and like not just your region, but do you travel the country much before going back, and really having a hunger for getting into the nooks and crannies of what Italy?
Not as much before, because you know, like you, as you said, when you don't travel much, you don't appreciate what is around you, and you always want to travel overseas. So, like, I would travel mostly to Spain, France, England, Ireland, and all of that.
Scotland.
And then Scotland. Sorry, Scotland. Oh, I love
chips.
I love Scotland.
Scottish as well. Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
I love Scotland. And and so, but then when you go somewhere else so far away, and you see that the people know more about you and your culture than you do, it's a big input.
It's fucking embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, and it's a big input to. It's just an approach, a mentality. You know, you should, and then after that experience, everywhere you go, you're interested to know more about what's around you.
That's such an interesting thing, because to anyone who's unbaptized into Italian culture, or any culture of any suitable complexity, it's Italian, or it's French, or it's, you know, and Australia is so limited, but even just saying Australian culture, you know, we're all aware, and I really want to get into this with the both of you about what the role you've played in exposing Australians to Australian culture, proper indigenous Australian culture through Rootstock. But, you know, there is this thing where you get brought up in this tiny little world, and then, like Kenny said, like, you get exposed to something that it actually exposes you. It doesn't expose the culture. It doesn't expose the shortcomings of the culture. It exposes your shortcomings of what that culture really is and what it can be. And, you know, the perfect example is like, show anyone what a ragu is in Italy, and you got fucking 450 definitions of it from north to south. But at the end of the day, they all ring fucking true. They all have a validity. But if you're going out of it going, the only ragu is this ragu, you're a fucking idiot. You're a small-minded, small village person. The moment you get exposed to a fucking bigger world, all of a sudden you're like, what? They've got ragus at the north of Italy, and the mid of Italy, and the south of Italy, and everywhere in between. And it's a growing up period, I think, with like any adult's been through, but it's even more pronounced in places like Italy and France and Japan, where like we're kind of spared it in Australia.
Well,
I think
it's disappointing, I think, in some respects. When I think about the great experiences you have in Europe, it's always about the synergy between the food and local culture of a place, right? So you see
and limited choice.
That's it. So if you go to, say, very simply, you go to the Loire Valley and you have a muscadet and the oysters from the river that runs into the ocean, and that's a very strong definition of the place you're in. If you go to, say, Burgundy and have breast chicken, the very fatty, almost duck-like chickens of that region with Pinot and Chardonnay, it makes sense. Comte and Vangeone in Jura. When you come to Australia, there's no real kindred spirit between the actual drink and food culture of the places that they're grown. When I think about things that are really important in Australia, like, say, King George Whiting in South Australia and McLaren Vale, there's not enough conversation between the wine culture of McLaren Vale and the amazing, seasonal fish that come through the ocean that runs into.
Well, let's play a real time game with that, right?
Yes.
There is no way in a million years that King George Whiting and McLaren Vale Grenache would have ever played a fucking role together. The grape varietal that grew, if you could take the same historical game where the land meets the fucking, what grows with it goes with it, there's no way the Grenache was going to be the fucking grape. It would have been something else. It would have been something that went with seafood, not with, we want to fucking serve big bolshy fucking reds because it plants well, and that's what the bigger... And this is the lesson that I think these little pockets of the old world speak to, what grows with it goes with it.
Yeah.
These are the lessons we've got to learn.
Yeah, in Australia we make wine for market predominantly, but I think people are addressing this with rethinking. So, for example,
I agree.
McLaren Vale planting more Mediterranean varieties, particularly white varieties that go with.
But that's been how long?
Of the place. Well, it's recent.
Yeah.
But thankfully, thankfully there's been a cultural shift in some respects with those sorts of things, and we're seeing that more and more where people are planting more simpatico to their environment and working out how to plant vineyards more simpatico rather than actually looking for yield and producing industrial wines. And I think that the consciousness around Australian wine particularly, and I think beer and spirits are a little bit behind that, but getting there. There's obviously some projects that are pretty interesting around the country that are trying to redress that in other forms of alcoholic beverage. But I think Australia's kind of getting it now. You're looking at things like the Riverland, which is the beating heart of cask wine in Australia, full industrial scale.
I'm such a fan of Riverland.
Well, this is an interesting thing. I went over to South Africa.
I'm a fan of the
times.
idea of the Riverland.
We needed our own Swartland revolution, as they had in South Africa, which was looking at an industrial growing region, looking to its assets, the older vines, and producing wines that are lighter, fresher, more delicious, but using resources from that place that are accessible to younger generation winemakers. And I think places like Riverland are doing that well in Australia. I know we're kind of moving along to a weird place here, but I'm just saying...
it's fucking go deep.
In Australia, we haven't really thought a lot about anything but producing a lot of wine to make commercial wine or fine wine with actually addressing what is the inherent culture of the place that it's grown in.
100%.
But that's everywhere.
It is everywhere. It's the same as Italy, like the same as France.
In my opinion, it's a kind of first stage before you move into something more appropriate, because the same happened in Friuli, Gravenet was growing Chardonnay and in Friuli, and then now is only growing Ribolla Gialla and Pignolo, you know? So it went back to the same thing with like Bulgari, like they tried to do wines in the Bordeaux style. They introduced varieties because the soil was somehow similar to Bordeaux, so they introduced Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot. Same thing, Syrah in Cortona, Barossa Valley with Syrah. Like it's not, in my opinion, is not a grape that belongs there. It's.
I think it did, but I think
it was
now
more
it's being shown through climate change to be inappropriate, which is the thing.
I think it was more truthful what they were doing before, which was fortified wines.
Yeah,
it's more a climate for that.
100%. Rather than producing table wine.
Do you think wine is, when we talk about like if it grows together, it goes together, and I find it fascinating that people had that palate to sort of, look for those sort of like fats and acids and stuff like. I find that.
I don't think they did. I think
that's
it was
what I mean.
necessity.
Like if it existed or not, or whether it's just a
I
thing
think
that
it's
happened.
necessity.
So and therefore,
What grew well?
Therefore, it just sort of it happens that they're historically known to work together. But do you think now that wine has, would definitely all agreeing, and the world has to agree that the specific things and grapes and they grow better in better parts of the world. Has wine removed itself from food enough? Because I know, like, owning wine shop and selling wine, like, the biggest pain in the butt question is, I'm having this for dinner. What goes with that? And you're just like, I don't know. What do you think's delicious?
That's
like,
right.
do you think wine
It's
is
such a great question.
removing itself from being tied to food?
I know. First of all, I've got to say that I think wine is food, and probably our biggest issue is that people are increasingly sourcing from farmers markets, and of course the whole paradigm of cage farm versus free range eggs is very literal for people. If you look at people who are sourcing proteins from certain farms, people know Bangalore pork, or they know Cape Grim beef, these sorts of things.
I agree, yeah. I know,
All that stuff is really important to people. And if you look at, particularly through the COVID era that we're in right now, organic food boxes coming to people's houses and getting better protein from better butchers. At the end of it all, wine is seen as a second-class citizen. People don't see that in the glass as the final condiment, as a food.
I'm gonna drink this. What should I eat?
Yeah, and people keep forgetting this is an agricultural product. It's just converted through the art of fermentation into something else. And for me, probably one of my biggest bugbears is trying to convince people that although it's pretty poison, we need to think of that as an agricultural product and use the same value systems that are applied to buying organic vegetables, farmers market fruit, small source butchery meat, or whatever it might be that turns you on. The same shit needs to be applied to wine, because if you don't think about wine the same way, you're fucking cheating yourself. And it's the same with restaurants, where restaurants tout paddock to plate or organic food or farmer grown stuff.
That's the bare minimum they should do.
And they look at the wine list and it's like, you've got industrially grown wine because it's convenient. Why are you doing that?
But
that
do you think that's such an argument these days? Like one of the big wins I think we've had in Australia, and I honestly, I'll fucking hang my hat on the fact that Australia, because of the two of your singular inputs via Rootstock, has the legacy you've left is the fact that you took the conversation about a wine and the production methods, and you successfully transplanted it into the minds of young cooks as well as young soms.
As a motivating factor.
Just as a driving factor, you made the link so powerfully between wine and the consumption of it between the way that it was raised, the way it was being grown, the way it's being treated. You made it the same as free-range chickens. Now I understand that 99% of anyone who might listen to this podcast who doesn't have a history of hospitality will go, "What? That's not. I don't know what you're talking about." But you literally upended the hospitality industry and made them think about, where everyone was thinking about free-range chickens and Cape Cream beef. You made those chefs think about the provenance of the grapes, and you made them aware of the process of the grapes in the same way that you made them think about the provenance and process of the beef and the proteins. I think that was, for me, the most powerful the biggest paradigm shift that I had between wine and in a reality, in a real sense, or what was in my glass. I was all about, organic, I've got grass fed, and then all of a sudden someone was like, it's exactly the same for wine. I was like, what?
Yeah, look, the interesting thing about Rootstock was that over its 5 major festivals over 6 years and 1 satellite thing, one of the things that was really important to us was evolving the conversation. And the first conversation ever was, all right, how are we going to bring people to the party to enjoy this and celebrate and be part of it and make it fun? And so the first year was simply about winemaking technique. That was it. We just said no additives. Sulfur accepted to a low degree, and we kind of defined that. And it was probably the later years of Rootstock where I think it got really important, where we were making it much more about farming than it was about winemaking. Winemaking was always inherent. It had to be a minimal intervention, natural to us, to a manifesto that we'd created.
It's a given.
It was a given, yeah, right. So you could only come if you're doing certain things, and we we're very strict about questions and all this sort of stuff. But I think probably the most seismic thing we did was when we started denying people access to the festival to show wine if they weren't farming organically. And in some respects, that was the undoing of the festival because it meant that Giorgio and I became organic growing cops.
Fucking gatekeepers, yeah.
Yeah, where we had to actually start doing policing of people.
How
and calling-
painful
Which
was
is
that
not
for you
pleasant,
guys?
not pleasant.
This was the reason. This is one of 3 reasons why Rootstock finished. One of them was that Giorgio and I got to a point where we were having such hard conversations with wine growers who had good intention, who would have been there in the first year, who we were celebrating to try and bring into the umbrella and encourage them to cross-pollinate with the international producers who were coming over. Of course, we had a policy which has never been replicated around the world anywhere, where only the winemakers could pour their wines, unless, of course, they didn't have an RSA and we had a marshal to do that for them. But you couldn't participate in Rootstock unless you were the wine grower yourself. Around the world, that does not happen. Nowhere. None of the festivals have ever done that. That was further than anyone had ever gone. But the interesting thing was that when Giorgio and I started in year 3 and 4 having to be wine cops, and a lot of it fell onto both of us to call up growers and say, how do you farm? And they were saying, look, I use a couple of sprays a year, but mostly it's organic. And we go back to the wine producers and say, your growers said this. And they'd say, no, it's not. And we'd be like, well, your growers said that. So we'll go back to them. And all of a sudden, Giorgio and I were spending months of our year chasing down people to talk about their
So
farming
you guys
techniques.
became the gatekeepers.
We just wanted organic
No, but
baseline to be the fundamental thing for
I know what
Rootstock.
you guys wanted, but what your role became as versus what you wanted was what you said. You became gatekeepers and you became the bad cop to some great intentions.
That was
So if you want to take
exactly
good,
right.
good cop, bad cop, you guys were the fucking bad cop.
Mostly Giorgio bag.
Well, but everyone needs it. But you guys were
I was the worst.
You
cop.
guys were the good.
That's
You
why you
guys were
hate
the
me.
bad cop to great intentions,
Yeah.
which is a really
Yeah.
difficult. That's a very grey line to walk.
Yeah, because there must be.
We pissed off a lot of people, and we made a lot of people talk about us behind our backs and question things, and they were, correcting behind our, line of vision things about each other and whispering to us, and it became a very political thing. But that's part of the intention. It was
Yeah.
always it was a political movement. We were
it's-
saying something about politics.
You guys upset.
It's a powerful stance, so and it's like, and I'm sure you're
So powerful.
empathetic to so many of the people who were like, a fucking ball hair away from being legit,
Yeah,
and you
yeah.
got to go, no, you can't do it this year. And was it a part of the resistance? And I know you've both made wine to a degree, but it's not your premier source of income, shall we say?
Can we
Like,
also
the people
say,
sort of-
Kenny, that it's not their bag, baby?
But did people there are people pissed off because essentially you're not winemakers, but you're allowed to hold that power to judge them? Like did you feel
Yes.
kickback from that? That they're like, who the
Definitely
fuck
there
are you
was
to
that.
judge?
Yeah, but
100%.
we try to be inclusive all the time, and we try to make a movement to grow together. But it got to a point where the commercial part took over
Infiltrated
and
When-
infiltrated. But this is not just Rootstock. It's if you look
it's
at
the market and natural wine in general.
if you look at all the natural wine fair in the world now, that's how it is, unfortunately. So
There's a natural wine fair that travels around the world that has an Amex Platinum Lounge in it. I mean, like, to me,
for
I'm not-
fuck's sake.
this will probably go global.
It's
but-
impossible they can actually achieve the goals.
Well, this. If you want to talk about Rootstock's issue of why we closed
Do you want to
version
name and
2,
shame?
then financially, Giorgio and I, and to an extent, our
You guys
partners
know
at
you
the
got
time-
full edit rights, so just speak freely with you and we can just edit it out if you name names, by the way.
Okay, Giorgio is
cool,
super
yeah.
hot, and I really find him.
But just so you know,
That's
we
the
didn't mention it at the start, but we can edit all of this
sometimes
part
I go to
out.
bed
But
at night dreaming
but
Kenny
it's okay,
comes in
it's
the
not-
window.
there is no need to name
No, it's not.
anyone,
No,
but
this is a
no, I'm
fun-
just saying,
Yeah.
like,
No,
that's
no,
just for the
If it slips,
if it slips, you
Yeah, yeah.
don't
We
don't feel
slip,
bad
we're
about
tight.
yeah.
We're,
No, I-
trained professionals here.
it. yeah, you look like it.
The second thing was that financially, in terms of the way we were responding to funding Rootstock, imagine putting on a festival that 14,000 plus people came to over 2 days, that's in a venue that costs you 50 grand for a weekend, even though it's sponsored, and with all the peripheral activities that go around it, and you have zero sponsors because sponsors don't want to touch the esoteria of what you're doing or don't understand it. Now, it might actually be easier. We might have found a sponsor now, but a Simpatico one, we had people from major publishing houses going, we'd like you to be part of a food and wine festival. oh, but Gordon's Gin is the sponsor. And Giorgio and I were like, no, we can't be part of
Can't
that,
do that,
because
no.
we can't do that, right? So,
But they want to use your name and articles.
100%,
We speak
100%.
about that a lot with the musicians that we've
Yeah.
spoken to. That idea of no one wants to pay you, but when it comes to like the bushfires and all the rest of it, everyone's like, "Hey, musicians, come and play for free. We want to make
Yeah.
money off the back of you because you can create money, but I don't want to pay you. So can we
all
just
the-
have that clear straight away?"
all the major festivals came to Rootstock in droves. We gave them access passes to look at what we're doing. They came after,
Hoping that they would help and maybe for.
and then they came to us afterwards and said, "Can you please do what you do here, but in our festival?" And we were
and you're
like,
like, yeah, but
well,
how
if-
can I fucking.
only under our criteria,
I'm not a shill.
and not under the banner of corporate sponsorship that doesn't align with what we're doing. And that was one of the hardest things. Was we were from day one, and most people find this mind blowing. We registered ourselves as a charity. We were a not-for-profit organization. We never paid ourselves. We were a charity. We divested our interests that were profitable into Aboriginal farming communities, and we had all the money that we donated elsewhere, be it to people who were working, who were so hardworking they deserved some money, to artists who funded stuff, to whatever. But all the money that went to Rootstock was done through us as a not-for-profit charity. Now, every other natural wine fair on earth is a for-profit event. Despite some saying they're not-for-profit, they still run, say, import companies that divest interests through importing wines, whatever it might be. But we ran this thing not-for-profit, and it was eating up our universe. Like, we were doing this shit with the back-checking on vineyards, creative consulting, Giorgio and I arguing for hours on end about conceptual stuff, artistic things, him and I doing creative workshop meetings, whatever it was, to try and create something different, interesting and important. And it was like, fuck, we're spending 3 to 6 months of our year on Rootstock as a not-for-profit, which was important to us and we loved it dearly. But fuck me, at the end of the day, no money means no honey. Like, we couldn't do it. The third thing was, I think this is probably, in some respects, the most important. Sometimes the great band that you love or the great artist that you love just finishes at the right point in the history of their career.
I couldn't agree more.
And we finished before things got commercialized.
I agree.
Before we had to start kowtowing to commercial authorities. We finished when our message was most potent. We finished when we felt like the culture in Australia had changed diametrically, when the message was universal. And we were like, Rootstock has changed things more than probably anything else in the last decade. We're done. And Giorgio one night and I were standing in PMV upstairs in the office, and we were talking about the next Rootstock, and we had actually invested in Japan and taking Rootstock to Japan. And we looked at each other and almost blurted out at the same time, we're finished with Rootstock, aren't we? And we just said, we're done. We're done. And we're going to take the message out to people. Even though Japan is kind of half locked into a venue, the next Rootstock's looked into...
You guys like Nirvana
contract.
without the suicide.
Well, I was gonna say it's. I thought about this earlier because I was gonna say we would ever come back, and I was thinking an example of that. So Stone Roses, fucking 2 albums in, everyone loved it.
So heaps
They
better.
they quit straight away at the peak, and then John Squires, a guitarist, was very famous for putting this art. He became an artist as well as a musician. He created this art piece that says, "I will never desecrate the grave that was once the Stone Roses." And they did. And then he came back and did a documentary, did a world tour, and all the wheels fell off again. That but there was a little moment where the world just made a lot of people happy again, or something. It's like, is there a world in which I think you're both people probably that would never say never. So it's like it might come back and it might be a fucking 200 people thing.
Can I just ask a question on that though?
Might be something at Mad or something. Or
Can I ask a question on that though? Because do you think the world needs Rootstock right now? I'm not saying the world won't need Rootstock again, or it certainly needed Rootstock when it existed. But do you think because that's a perfect question, like a perfect lead in, but do you think Rootstock is required right now?
I can't think of a week where I've not been asked, when's the next one? Come on, you're doing it again. But to answer Kenny's question about revitalizing something, Giorgio and I talk almost every day. We are a
do you have a WhatsApp group? Is it called Sexy Boys?
No, we use smoke signals because it's
That's
natural.
pretty strange for somebody who hates me.
Exactly.
The icon's a devil.
But there is definitely we had been in talks with somebody about doing something that was, let's say, the only way I can describe it, and forgive me because Giorgio might describe it better, but the more adult version of Rootstock. We had actually talked until COVID kind of rent asunder everything. We've been conceptualizing something that was a 2.0 version of what we did, but something that was a bit more, maybe more meaningful, less party, less people
Leaner
as well, leaner.
That's a wild thing for you to say. If I may just jump in, because I felt like Rootstock, whatever it was, if the first one was 0.0 and the last one was 0.4, whatever it was, I felt like you guys had really run to the top of the mountain, planted the fucking flag, and almost erected some fucking tents. It's almost unassailable for anyone else. There was going to be a long way. So it's interesting to me what you guys saw the shortcomings were in the final Rootstock, where you thought that you could really do something more. Because what I've seen in the absence of Rootstock as it existed is that there's been nothing more progressive than what you presented in that final Rootstock. So one of the things, Mike, for people who don't know, Mike and I and Kenny are involved in P&V together, and I saw Mike this morning, and we was talking. I was like, well, what's the future? Not just of wine, but of Rootstock, of hospitality. And I would have thought you guys ran out of room. But it doesn't feel like that for you two. So I'm just going to exit now asking, like, what is it? Because I fucking certainly don't know.
Well, I think Giorgio can probably answer as well as I can. I'll start. But, I mean, first of all, Giorgio and I have, for many years now, been very strong advocates for Aboriginal inclusion in things that we do. And Rootstock obviously was a festival that held that as a very strong mantle, in terms of not just education, but cultural input and food, farming, and conversations around that. We work very closely with Bruce Pascoe, who was a great ally, Uncle Max, the elder of Redfern, but also connected to Ewan country, Dwayne Bannon Harrison, who's a great mate of mine and my family as well, and he's down in Ewan country as well, and a great ally for us in terms of creating education and
Uncle Noel.
Uncle Noel and Trish, who are down again in Ewan country as well. And so a major part of what we thought was important and increasingly important from Rootstock number 3 through Rootstock number 5 was talking about sustainability, but through the real lens of agriculture that comes from the indigenous people of Australia. Like, we can talk about sustainable farming all we like, with shit planted into unseeded ground that comes from invasive species that we brought into this country. But the real strong message we wanted to put across was, what's the native ingredient that's most important? Not shit chucked into a gin by a distiller, but foodstuffs and proper agriculture, aquaculture, and all the ideas that went behind agriculture that came well before the invasion of Australia in 1788. And so that was the next message we were trying to push hard. And we did that. We did a good job of that, I think.
I think you did a great job of that.
Yeah, but we didn't do enough. So the next thing for us, and Giorgio and I find this very much important in our lives, is helping as allies and pushing the agenda and making sure people are aware of this. I mean, Giorgio, after bushfires, you can tell your story. What did you do after the bushfires this year?
Yeah, but I didn't know anything special, but like...
Yes, he did.
Uncle Noel...
It sounds like it led into something that was very special.
No, but it's like, it's just... so Uncle Noel and Trish had this amazing Aboriginal cultural center and farm supplying Ben Shuri. They met Ben Shuri at Rootstock. So again, that's why Rootstock is so important to me, because for me it was a platform where
like
people could
LinkedIn
meet.
With people.
That's 100%
Where
thing.
people could meet, and the idea of inviting international producers, the idea obviously of involving First Nation people was this, to make everybody to talk to each other and grow. So like they had this amazing Aboriginal cultural center, and they obviously being badly affected by the bushfire. Everything, their house,
Everything.
This is Ewan
was
country,
gone.
which is south of us.
This
Yeah,
is-
so it's near
South
Milton.
Coast, South Coast, New South Wales.
near Milton. So so I just put some of my wine online, and I raised some money, and we bought some plants, all native plants, and I organized a group of volunteers, and we went down to the farm to replant pretty much straight away. The soil was still hot, literally, but the input for this wasn't just it wasn't what I did. It was more about the energy that Uncle Noel and Trish put into these. You know, like 2 days after the bushfire, the first thing they wanted to do before even thinking about building another house for themselves was replanting straight away to make sure that there is wildlife coming back as soon as possible. So who is going to do that? Which Occidental white man is thinking that way? No one.
No.
What was the driver for you though, Giorgio? Because, like, first of all, like I think of myself as somebody who's not aware, but very interested in and use the term woke. I'm not woke in that sense, but I'm really receptive.
You just you care. You care for your country very deeply.
Deeply care, but in my corner of the world, right? And but you're from somewhere so far removed, and yet you're so rooted in a corner of my country. And I'm interested in what drives that for you, because I think it's a really important thing, the individual driver. You're on the outside of it, you're a white Italian man who's doing more for the indigenous conversation in I'll use it grossly, my country, which it's not, we all know, but you're doing more for my country than I am. And I'm a person who's deeply invested in communities in my country. I'm just really, I want to know what drives you about Indigenous culture, Australian Indigenous culture specifically, that's got you so engaged.
It's what we talked about before. It's about discovering what's around you and do something for what's around you. But I don't see the world as nations. So like that's a bit of a political thing. But for me, the world is the world. It's the whole thing. So it's not Australia, it's not Italy, it's not France. I live here and I do whatever I can for where I live. For me, this is like it's about, again, if I was in America, I would probably do the same for the native people there. I don't know. I'm really fascinated by all this knowledge that is kind of being pretty much lost, and I want to try to do something to get it back. And again, for me, Australia is not Australia. For me, Australia is part of the world, and everything is happening here is being so bad. So bushfires and all this stuff, and the knowledge is all there. We just need to suck it up somehow, try to conversate with these people, try to get their knowledge back. And I know it's very difficult. And
it's not difficult though, because you guys have proven it non-difficult. Like,
it is. Like,
no, but just in this, I don't mean it's not difficult. I know, my point about it's not difficult is you both have proven it accessible. Maybe non-difficult is the wrong term. You've made it accessible to so many people who may view it as difficult, and you've made it effortless. And I know that neither of you are Australian Indigenous, but you've made a lot of these conversations so accessible to me and to countless others. And I understand that it might be a slightly difficult thing for you guys to answer with any degree of like depth, because it's not your land, it's not, all of these things. But at the same time, I've been exposed to realities and truths that exist within Indigenous culture from a fucking fat Jewish man and a fucking
don't say fat.
Yeah, I'm fat too.
I'm trying to lose weight.
No, but I'm saying this to be as fucking wide as I can. To be someone who's so divorced and a fucking an Italian who didn't, when he left Italy, didn't even understand
the grips of
his own grape heritage, and yet you guys have brought a spotlight to these vastly important
But this is
topics, and I'm intrigued by that.
Well, why? Because
Sorry about the fat.
No, that's all right. I'm cuddly and sexy.
You're beautiful. That's an unfair thing. I'll edit that out.
The thing right now is that we're white and privileged, and so what can we do? We can advocate, and we can work harder to advocate for people who don't have the voice that we do, or the privilege that we do. So if we have time and money, that's what we should be doing, and that's what Giorgio and I do. We talk about it, we discuss, we do our own individual things.
We don't have any of those.
But
that's true. We don't have.
But
with our meager money and our meager time,
Yeah,
we spend it. But that's it. But like my world,
We make time.
yeah, we make time to do it
make
because you
money
make time because it's important, and everything that revolves around my world is like I would rather.
But every moment you spend speaking about these very important things actually takes away from the money that you could be earning by talking about something different.
Don't care. I'd rather pump it back into communities that need it.
Yeah.
And this is the point I'm trying to fucking just allude to. The fact that every moment you guys could have pumped into yourselves and the natural wine revolution, like whether the cameras are fucking turned off or not, the inverted commas of the natural wine revolution, what you've chosen to do, you started with natural wine and now you've changed the tact, you've changed the conversation to something that I believe is so much more important.
But there is no difference.
I don't think there is a difference.
This is the leap. We went from talking about process, what's in wine, to talking about agriculture, what's not in vineyards, through to whose land is it? And now it's our responsibility at that point to say all the shit's been jammed into the ground to grow around Australia is on unceded country that belongs to Aboriginal people that gives us benefit of lifestyle. P&V is a shop that, let's say 50 to 60% of its product is from Australia. That's from unceded Aboriginal land, planted to invasive species that we then benefit from in bottle. So we need to do a good job of acknowledging that, talking about it, and then talking about what the opposite is and what the opportunities are in those places to do other things. That's what turns me on.
Wow.
Every single event that I go to,
That's such a beautiful way to put
acknowledgement
that.
of country is compulsory.
And
Because you
but
must do, but I must talk about what comes from that place.
Do you ever
it's
find
a
though
really-
that
but it's
the
a really
acknowledgement of
basic thing.
culture, the acknowledgement of country, like it comes off as lip service as opposed to what
Not if you
you've
do
just
it in
described?
personal context.
This is
no
what I was
way.
going to say. Like what
What you've just described is not.
But
Personal
when I
context
say
makes it
this,
relevant.
like it sounded easy. It's because you've picked something that you just love and what is already your life and your careers, and you've just looked into that and sort of like we've spoken to a few people about this, and it's never about like, especially in current climate, but it's like don't over politicize like what it is that you're doing. Like you don't set out to become bastions of, it's like, oh, here's this like half Scottish, Jewish, first generation Australian and Italian guy being the bastions for white Australians with indigenous culture. Like that's not what you set out to do. That's not what you should be setting out to do. You care about the little thing in life that you know about, and you look into its heritage, and you discover that and sort of excavate that a little bit more and give to it what you can. Like I don't know. Like I get uncomfortable that when it becomes overly politicized in terms of like
And overly laboured.
yeah, and what like labeling as well, like what it is you're doing. Like you're just looking after your little tiny corner of the world.
Yeah.
Like that's what you're doing, and it's like, and then people are going to start sort of trying to be like, well, if you should have an opinion about this. And it's like, it's okay to say I don't have an opinion about that. All I care about is this little thing that we do, and it's it goes to farming, which is a huge part of the history.
Well,
of
the
this
farming
nation.
was the thing I think, Kenny, that
huge.
And let me put some words in your mouths, boys, because this is the way that I consumed what you created. And tell me if I'm off the fucking pitch at all, please. But I was exposed to natural wine by yourselves and Andrew Gard.
Mm-hmm.
I had tastings in my backyard with Kenny before we opened Mary's. With Andrew Gard, I had tastings
I remember that.
outside before we ever opened. Outside,
milk crates,
outside the Telstra building with Giorgio, before we even opened the doors at Mary's Newtown, and they continued. Mike, Bennie, we discovered via the most gorgeous of luck, though, just him sitting in the bar at Mary's Newtown after we opened. But my exposure to natural wine happened through a select few people. But then all of a sudden there was this change there was a change in direction from all of you around what it meant. And so I got exposed to the idea of, well, what I picked up about natural wine was like, scratch the surface, cunt. It was like, you thought you had this, scratch the surface, scratch it, dig deeper. And we all just kept on, like I just kept on, just like natural wine was a thing. And then all of a sudden you guys are scratching the surface of these other worlds.
What was the motivating factor for you though? Why? Because
behind natural wine?
No, but for both of you, if you think about it, like
The motivating
you can
factor.
open the most wicked, crazy, fun burger.
No,
fries place on earth, but why? Why did it happen? What was the importance?
We were scratching that itch before we even turned the key.
But why?
Because
It's just who we are as people, I suppose. Like
easiest question to answer.
We delved into it in our little corner of the world, and it's like the same way, you know, we give a fuck about, you know, the when we were buying them online, whatever. But the gins that we bought, the whiskeys that we bought, like, and you know, and the beef that we were buying, and the chickens we were buying, it all had to sort of. We were putting popular culture in people's faces and showing them that it didn't have to be a piece of shit version of it. Like,
or it didn't have to, or more importantly, I think it didn't have to be a hoity-toity version of it.
Yeah.
You could deep fry great chicken. You could sell like difficult wine by the glass. In a populous venue.
That was a laborious task at the start. Fuck.
Oh, of course.
People
It
be like,
still is.
I'll have a Sauvignon Blanc, but like, don't have it. I'll have a Pinot Grigio, don't have it. Like, I'll just have a rum and Coke.
I've got it.
Don't want to hear it.
I'll have the Pinot Grigio, and you going, you don't want it because it's Dario Princic, you cunt, and you fucking gonna hate it. But the
connection is the land, you know. Like I think, and that's how it's easily connected with indigenous people. You know, it's like we want to support businesses that are doing something to preserve the land and make this land to go on for
but
much
that's
longer.
so far away from, and I hear you, and I fucking, the reason why you guys are singular is because that's your response. But my response,
well, it's non-negotiable now for both of us. It's non-negotiable.
But our response at that point was something so far away from where we've all ended up. Like, and I'm taking a stab in the dark here and imagining that the first time you guys put on Rootstock, it wasn't with the idea that indigenous culture was going to be at the fucking firm center of what Rootstock actually was meant to be. What it started as was, like you said at the start, it was a fun time. It was an exposure to something new and different. But there's something underlining all of it, which is just like, there's an element of like truth.
True, but like you know, my question is, you know, and this, for me now it's a urgency of time because all these people with knowledge are all old, and for me it's a necessity to try to extract this information, obviously with their consents and with their participation. Yeah, because that's what we want to do. It's like how this country was prospering for like 30,000 years or more, and now in 200 years we having this incredible bushfire. Because talking to Uncle Noel, like it, you know, in his culture and in what he remembers for all the stories from all the generation before, there is no history of bushfire of this incredible scale. Like
No, not
it's,
at all.
it's not at all. So
Well,
like,
they're not good. Also, they're hardly like to pass of bad stories on just willy nilly.
Potentially.
No, I'm just joking. Yeah,
No.
but I take your point. But there's also a reality where, okay, yeah, the bad stories, maybe they're just focusing on this point, but we don't even have the good stories from their history, like seeded through our regular day to day. That's to me the problem. Like the fact we don't have the normal stories of indigenous culture seeded through our day to day, let alone like the fact that something's unprecedented. We're all living through unprecedented times. Forget the unprecedented nature. The fact is, we've all been dealing with a lack of indigenous conversation. Doesn't matter if
It's true, but keeping it to the forefront of mind makes it healthy and happy. And
Oh,
I think
100%.
I think about my universe where, for example, my brothers both work in Aboriginal spaces, one in human resources and one in Aboriginal health. And
I'm not
whatever we
trying
can
to.
do-
Sorry,
no,
just.
no,
to-
but what I'm saying
I'm
is
not
like-
trying to say that I don't believe that bad things haven't happened. I'm just like,
No, but for sure, what we can do now is be more cognizant of these things and support. So, in my environment now, I think about actions that can help in terms of participation, in terms of advocacy, and in terms of actual inclusion.
Yeah.
And that's buying product,
Yeah.
supporting people, calling people, and involving them. And that's literally, if I do a festival, my manifesto now is equal inclusion of female plus also percentage of Aboriginal people for their input. If I think about what I do at PMV, we have certain things in place, including paying the rent, plus also how we're going to move forward with the next little generation of our projects there, which involve Aboriginal people. If I think about the way that I work with my family, I think about how to do advocacy for people who are needing help, including donating to art galleries or to initiatives for Aboriginal people. And so everything is forefront of mind now. That's my next phase. My next phase is, all right, I'm in a good position, theoretically, to now enunciate this clearly to a broader group of people, and be it agriculture for Uncle Noel down the Ewan country or working with Dwayne Bannon Harrison, my mate, just south
Do-
of Nara with his stuff. In
do you
terms of
think this
food,
is a
like
natural-
all these things, like just if you do anything, include them.
do you think that's a natural progression of what natural wine fairs
Absolutely, this is about land
across the globe?
No way. This is about Australia specifically, because natural wine fairs
So
around
what do
the
you
globe
think? Do you,
are particularly focused on wine. Food is a byproduct. Agriculture is a conversation around wine. They don't necessarily talk about food. There's not necessarily, like Rootstock, which was so original, reams of raw farm product and
yeah.
chefs cooking that product to convert it into something. You could take away things. You could watch it being cooked, all that stuff. Natural wine fairs around the world do not do that. The most popular natural wine fairs around the world simply show you wine in a forum that's fun and a party. And increasingly so is invaded by interlopers who go there for a good time.
Also,
not to be conscious about what they're actually talking
also
about it.
very little of them are actually a good time or a party.
Well, for some people it is.
Yeah, but like, let's be honest.
Not for old blokes like George.
No, but let's be honest.
We'd rather be in bed with a cup of tea.
No, let's be honest. Most natural wine fairs are fucking a snooze festive. Like
Well, that's it. It's
everyone's
rinse
in
and
on the
repeat.
same
One
fucking
of the things we saw in
conversation.
Australia was copycat is a bad word, but I'll use it because it's instructive. But a lot of other wine fairs started cropping up that were either close to Rootstock's energy, sure, great, I enjoyed those, or far away, but just sort of intuitively used the energy of a wine fair where cool avant-garde producers turned up.
Yeah.
A DJ was there, some cool burger guy.
No, use
was there,
us.
whatever. But like, you know, you guys weren't there, but
We've been a part of things like this.
Yeah, but-
I don't want
but-
to fucking feel bad about it.
but
They
those
talk
things-
to power.
yeah,
cunt.
those things were great for shifting culture to say to people, drink more wine
Yeah.
and be involved in the wine industry and start considering
Or
your
moving-
conscious
But
consumption
this
of
is-
wine.
We had
That's
the
great.
conversation the other night when we had a couple of wines upstairs with Lou and Joe and Billy and stuff, and I think when Matty Kitch is there, he's come on board recently, and he
All these names are people who are important to PMV.
yeah, important to Newtown and the family around us.
Truth.
It was that idea of you know, like in the same way the name. And I was speaking to someone else about it. That I think it was actually the potential new shop, whatever. The guy was like, "Where does it come from?" I was like, "Oh, it just stands for piss and vinegar." it's all stands for. And when Louise and I were talking about it, I was like, I think it might be a Louise and Kenny collab, that one. Like Louise wanted to call it Piss and Vinegar, and I was like she threw it out there as if to say, I'd love it so much, but it would never happen. It was like, well, we could just call it P&V Wine Merchants, and it sounds fancy, and we all win. And it's the point of it was not about like having this secret joke. The point was, we never talk about it, but when people ask, it's removing the pretension around what people think wine is. Because natural wine I think is a very different thing to the old world of wine, where it is a bunch of fucking old white dudes sitting around a room, like, you know, joking about like, oh yeah, did you like the Riesling? Wasn't even a Riesling. But you said you loved it, but it wasn't even a Riesling.
But also, if I can say, like, what natural wine is, it's a bunch of young white people. In Australia, natural wine is a bunch of white young people just fucking getting on with the program.
Hopefully giving a fuck, and hopefully
I think
what the boys are talking about, like introducing them to
the difference of
the land. Like, it's something that's
this is what
Uncle
you guys
Noel, Uncle Noel only
us.
drinks natural wine.
But this is what
Uncle Bruce only drinks craft beer.
This is what
Yeah.
Rootstock introduced. The reason why natural wine in Sydney is different to natural wine in fucking Brooklyn. Natural wine in Brooklyn is a bunch of white people who are fucking trying to find a cheaper version of Burgundy. They're trying to find an in to a fucking wine cellar. It's the equivalency of someone trying to fucking buy their way into Soho and then actually making Brooklyn cool. You know, they're trying to find a way into being cool. The way you guys have created, or situated natural wine is you've given it a perspective that is true and real. You can't buy into natural wine here in a real sense, like in a proper, like you guys are gatekeepers. You can't be spokespeople. You can't talk about natural wine with you without having an understanding of where it comes from and what it really means and all the tie-in effects. I think that's a powerful thing. I think this is one of the number one things that Australia has over every other natural wine scene in the world right now, is we have amazing winemakers, but we have these gatekeepers that go, no, not showing your wine. Not showing your wine. Why? Because you do this. And it's disingenuous to everything that is being created.
Can we, I think we've gone really deep, quite heavily into lots of things, and I think one time something that's come from this whole, like, the pandemic is people look at this world differently from now. It's like you're either looking at it quite negatively about, like, you know, the pending depression or recession, whatever it is, or a lot of people like Jake and I'm going to assume you guys are quite similar. I just want to ask you on that, is like, view it as a very positive time for this world, about like shaking off the bullshit, like sort of a bit of cleansing.
Good question, Kenny.
The great exhalation of this, like, slowing down and moving forward, like more slimline in terms of getting rid of the clutter in every part of life, fucking clothes, shit around your house, you know, relationship, like just business bollocks, mental static, all these things. So considering you'd already given up some of these things like Rootstock, which is obviously deeply important to you, like what does the next 6 months hold for you guys? I assume you're thinking fairly positively about it. I don't want to lead question, but I think that's the people you are. What do you think is going to happen?
I'm gonna say something that maybe upset few people, but for me, this pandemic period was one of the best periods of my life.
Man, I think the world will miss COVID-19 when it goes. I think it's been a...
For me was, I seen things that I haven't seen before. Like, I have to somehow turn part of my business and I had to change things. And, but for me, like, delivering wine at 8 p.m. at night in a little suburb over the bridge and people coming at the door and giving me products from the garden. I never seen that before. Yeah. You know, like, for me, that was amazing. So I would hope that part of humanity kind of stays. For me, it was very powerful and really inspired me. And
I found It's interesting because the first 2 and a bit months of COVID was very important to me, and that for all that I do in my day jobs, journalist, presenter, consultant, whatever, and that all went away. I focused on P&V, which to me
a lot of
actually-
your world, like you travel a lot and your calendars got wiped
so
out.
instead of
And media's suffering, so there's a lot of what's your world just fucking
collapsed. 2019, I did 70 flights, and that was the biggest year of my life for travel. And I, by virtue of the blessings of my career, get to travel around, talk at stuff, and do things around the world. But probably my happiest moment, weirdly enough, was that I could focus on P&V, which I actually love more than anything else that I do. And
64 Enmore Road, Newtown.
yeah, when I'm drinking wine from P&V, the Caribbean Merchants Newtown.
imported by Giorgio Di Maria.
Not these.
But it was amazing. So that first week, I remember of COVID, Lou Dowling, who is Jake Kenny and my business partner. We had
The only person we follow on Instagram.
that's
And a
right,
beautiful fucking woman.
the best. But like we had a teary
So
conversation inside the office and said we're going to keep this going. We're going to keep every single soul in this business employed. And we've come out the other side with double the staff and a whole lot of complex issues with how we run the business because it's very different. But my happiest period was the 2.5 months of lockdown where I could focus on health and well-being, focus on the business that I actually really love more than anything else that I do, and invest energy into culture and community, which is my job. My job is spirit animal. Like, you know, like
I want to say it's been nice to have you. Mike's been, there's 4 of us part of P&V, and Mike, let's go backtrack a little touch. Mike used to always hit up Jake and I, like, when's Mike Bennie's turn? When are we going to open a business again? When's Mike Bennie's turn? And then we open a business together. Mike Bennie's too busy to be in the business, and it's like
I'm a spirit animal.
Yeah, spirit animal, but so busy. Like you say, 70 flights. You were like, well, Mike's not here for the next 4 fucking months, and it's been a really beautiful. I think it's been a really beautiful time to see your influence and energy being able to just be there.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing. But I think the other thing that I find most potent about this time is that as I watch culturally how people respond to their environments, and they're sitting at home and they're missing going out for their big ticket meal once a week, or to invest in something that's a fun night out, or going to a gig or a party or whatever it is and spending money on that. People's consumption has been more focused on consideration. And so they're looking at the organic vegetable and fruit boxes they can have delivered to their house. So they're going to like sustainable agriculture, farming, butchers to give meat to their place. And instead of spending $100 at a bar or a restaurant for their bottle of wine, they're doing 50 or 60 instead of 20 to take away from a bottle shop. And P&V does all things at all levels and encourages people into the education and culture around that by being nice and not trying to upsell or do anything shitty and antagonizing. But for me, this period's been amazing about how people have embraced the idea of the experience around a glass of wine. And I hark back to the beginning of our conversation tonight when Giorgio said to me once, and it resonates, you don't drink well. And I think about that a lot. People are drinking better and less, but they're drinking better. And in drinking better, they're engaging much more consciously with agriculture, production, process provenance, history, and storytelling that P&V delivers. It's not a sermon about P&V. There's a lot of great places around Australia. Oh. But the idea that people are spending their $25 bottle of wines now, $50 bottle of wine because they want to have that experience at home with a great piece of beef or eggplant, whatever it might be, from an organic source. And all these things are a conduit to consciousness about consumption. That's the most fucking potent and awesome thing that I've seen in the epoch that we're in now.
My dad's partner, Helen, they've been together like 20 years, and she's always had a similar theory, but it's about Italy and clothes because she loves Italy. And my father and her, they've a second one, not an apartment, but they have an apartment in Lake Como. It sounds really fancy. It's not fancy. But they have Helen especially. Fancy. She has a real affinity for Italy. And the way she always summed it up was basically that Italians will buy a beautiful coat and wear it for the rest of their life. She's like, I really love that about them. Like, it's not just a fucking, this, I want to wear this weekend, the next weekend I'm wearing that. She's like, He's like, I'd rather spend the money and wear something well and wear it forever. And I think that's a similar thing with it's we're not even talking like big changes, but just like that slight investment of that extra $7-8 to sort of drink well, and think about the farming, think about your community. Because I think Jake brought it up, or Jake had it in the conversation. We spoke about it. It's that great exhalation, because most people in their professional lives are on this maybe not a roller coaster, but a fucking train that just doesn't stop. And it's for you to stop it, or even stop people and say, I really don't enjoy this part of my life. Like, just throws you off it, and you're fucking cast to the side. It might take you 6 months to get back to a place where you can just pay your rent or whatever. True. But it's been nice now, because the whole world got the brakes slammed on. We all had to stop. We all had to think about it. People have taken it so differently, but we think it's a good time.
Thanks.
That's disgusting, Mike.
I'm gonna do away too.
You guys keep talking.
George is going to teach me Italian in like 5 minutes. I think you're going to come back. We're going to be talking fluent.
Oh, the camera is gone.
Fluent Italian.
Let's do Italian lessons.
Yeah. I think the battery is already gone. You okay? Yeah. From the background.
All right. Nobody can hear you.
What's fun? I don't know whether to bring attention to it or not.
I agree with you. For me, it's like, why do I have to eat beef every night? Oh, I got to a certain age, and I can see that, I'm more careful what I put into my body.
Yeah.
So I don't care if I buy a beef in Australia that costs $100 a kilo. I rather eat that once a week rather than every night.
Yeah.
Same thing with the wine. I don't want to necessarily always get wasted, but at the same time I drink a couple of glasses of wine every day. I drink with my meal.
Yeah.
And I want to drink things that I like. So it's very important, I think, the consumption.
Do you think like you speak so fiercely and proudly of the sort of that journey back into the Australian culture, heritage, and farming, and we touched on before about that idea of getting bigger respect for where you've come from. Like, is there a part of you that wants to take some of this back to Italy and sort of pursue? Or do you think it exists in somewhere you could slot in, or is it a bigger job for you to go back and start something? Like, is there a want or anything in you to sort of do that in Italy, or is it a you're happy to visit there and continue your journey out with what
I would like?
Because I don't think I probably would live. I don't feel I'd live in Scotland again for a long term. I love fucking going back, do way more trips than I ever do. Potentially want to be closer.
Yeah.
So I'm not like 24 hours away. But I don't know if I'll ever be the beat. Yeah, I don't know. I just
great.
I think about it, and I think about.
I like to spend some more time in Italy and do things over there. But but that really comes to my kind of the lifestyle that I imagine for myself. But yeah, I would like. I've been thinking a lot about actually buying a little property on this very remote island in Aeolian Island in Sicily, and spend some time there and making a little wine. But at the same time, I really enjoy the life of a traveler. For me, it's very important.
Is this really a stop for you? Is that what you feel like in your heart and your guts? Australia is one of the stops.
Well, yeah, definitely. I feel really good here because it's a good base. It's like I can feel like people are listening.
You have impact with your decisions as well.
I have impact with my decision, and I love to be based here. But at the same time, I don't want to stop doing things around the world, and obviously in Italy because it's my own country. Because it comes back to what we said before. Discovering yourself and your country more when you live abroad.
Yeah. What about sorry, I've never even asked you, Giorgio, but like parents and aunties, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters. Like, have you got a whole everyone's there? Or
I've
what's-
been there. It's the best lasagna I've ever eaten in my life.
Bullshit.
I've been there.
Oh, is it better than made in Italy?
Yeah. It's better than
What is it?
Pizza Hut.
Is it better than?
Amazing enough.
Is it better than Italian bowl?
It's pretty much everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone is there. Yeah, all my family
Yeah.
is there.
It's
and
amazing.
So for
Seeing,
me, I
Giorgio,
think
as well.
seeing
it's hard.
Giorgio's roots for
That's the
me
thing
was
as well, yeah.
formative for me. To see where Giorgio comes from was really formative. As
Yeah.
one of my closest friends, to be able to witness how family life works when you see him in isolation in Australia,
Yeah.
and people have a judgment about Giorgio and who he is and what he does, and accept him as a bon vivant and lifeblood of energy for events and stuff. But once you see where he comes from, it's
But it is
it's
an
way more
isolation.
important. It's amazing. It was amazing for me.
Because I think about it a lot like that. Like my parents both, my dad's just turned 69, my mom's 68.
60 what?
69.
69!
I was like, I would have thrown you, if it wasn't COVID, I would have thrown you a fucking massive pie. But that idea of, and they've both been very healthy their whole lives. But and I talked to Jake about it a lot and just like, what if one of them gets sick or something? Like, it's like, I just gonna go home for a bit. And like, thank fuck, I have a job and a surrounding and a support and a best friend who just look at you and go, fucking go.
For me, it's very hard now. Like I would have loved to be there like so many times, but in the other hand, my mom is pretty old and she got pneumonia a couple of years ago. So for me, like even the idea of traveling and go back home, it's kind of exposing her to a risk, and I just don't want to do it right now.
Yeah,
but
now's not the right time to go to Italy.
I would like.
Well, I mean, Northeast Italy was
No.
epicenter.
Yeah.
My dad
Exactly.
and Helen they were stuck there for 3 months at that time. They went to they bought this new apartment in Como, and it's a whole thing about if you
Lake Como. Is that George Clooney's Lake Como?
It's like it's like a kilometer down the road, but it's like an apartment. But it was like if you stay there for 2 months of a year,
It's like
it was to do about the
George Clooney's Lake Como.
It's like the what do you call it? The whatever the fucking
We call it
the
like
land tax or whatever.
George
George
Clooney's Lake
stamp
Como.
duty or something like that. If it's an investment property,
Or
the stamp
Stampio-
stamp duty was like
Dudio.
20%. And if you can claim it as a primary residence, it was like 3%. And to claim it as a primary residence, probably telling you, they'll be on the phone fucking tomorrow. The 4 people that watch this, but it's it was way less. So they would plan to go and live there for 2 months. So they left like mid-February.
The Gramiomio.
Yeah, left there to go to Como in mid-February, and just to sort of be like, and my dad was semi being like, going out of 2 months, but I was like, you're retired. You're about to go to your apartment in Lake Como for 2 months. I was like,
And it's a
shut the fuck
chore.
up. Like, what a dream. What an absolute dream.
Yeah,
But
your
they got
dad's
stuck
coming
there.
off as a bit of a dick. But he's not.
He's fucking such
No,
a
I know he's
beautiful
not.
man.
I know he's not.
He
He's
loves
coming.
Jake. Jake loves him.
No, I love him, but
I
he's
know.
coming off as a bit of a dick.
I'm keen to hear about what they eat and all the stuff they do there.
They were there
Yeah,
for
deep
4
fried
months.
fucking
They're
Mars
for-
bars
they're
in the
for 4
middle of Lake
months.
Como.
But it's and he was sending me photographs. He was
He's
like, they were
pissed off they can't get
they were in
haggis.
proper isolation, but he was sending me photographs of the view and just like taking a walk up a hill and was like, so like, yeah, life could be a lot worse. Life
Hey,
could be a lot worse.
Just one of the things I've been
we
really
go.
interested in.
Here we fucking go.
Oh, fuck. just trying
Why
to
me
fucking
up,
wrap
cunt?
shit up.
You just called my dad a cunt.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I totally did.
like Eddie.
What
Eddie
I'm-
can't.
Look, this is a mix of the inside baseball and also just having known both of you for the entire amount of time this has been unfolding. I kind of get a sense of why Rootstock had a natural finish, but I also know about both of you. You're restless motherfuckers, and you both have a very deep opinion about what is going to happen and what's required, whether you have a role in it or not. Yeah, just fucking do what you need to do. What's because, and if I may speak a little boldly into the reasons why Rootstock started, it was to stoke the fires of investigation and create some excitement around something that didn't exist and some in important parts of agriculture and sustainability in the wine world, and it grew very quickly to encompass a whole range of things we've talked about, indigenous kind of awareness, but specifically in wine world, just capping it to wine world, what are the exciting parts of wine that you've seen in the last 12 months, or where do you see excitement brewing, and what are the areas that you're most excited about specifically in wine world? Mike?
Oh, yeah, sure. Look, I think one of the things that strikes me as a kind of broadacre farmer of wine in Australia, I get to see everything. And my privileged job as a wine journalist and presenter means that I see between 1 to 10 dozen samples coming to my office per day to taste.
Smell it in the office.
You can smell it, yeah, it's gross. But what I've seen is that people taking cues from the natural wine world and applying it to their own paradigms of how they approach wine has been the most interesting thing. So when I tasted today a pet nat from probably one of the most buttoned down, conservative approach to the cellar door with rose garden and Cape Dutch architecture style cellar doors in Australia, a place that's so white collar, pretentious, and to an extent,
You're really selling it.
yeah, well, but this is the thing, right? Like this place that is so theoretically exclusionist, producing a pet nat that's of a very high standard, says volumes about the reach of natural wine.
So if I can just jump in, that to me says the reach about your influence. I'm not trying to get to where your reach has gotten
this
to.
is the important thing
I'm asking about what you think is the most exciting, where
that
edge
excitement.
is.
The thing that excites me is that conservative producers are now working within the paradigms of natural wine, be it false or legitimate, large scale, trying to adopt some of the principles. What we've done with bringing awareness to a culture of things that we find important is the ricochet through the industry that says we're upset and unsatisfied with how you produce what you do without the checks and balances that allow you to put wines on the market. And the public is now more concerned about process and provenance than you think. So therefore you need to do a fucking better job. And I think Rootstock did that better than anything else. And for me,
Couldn't agree more.
future of wine for me
That's
is...
a powerful fucking statement, by the way, and I could not agree more.
Future of wine for me is that those producers who are unaccountable for their actions, that have zero accountability for the ingredients they put into wine, are now being questioned by people who actually give a fuck. Yeah. And so people go out there and go to wineries and step into a cellar door on their beautiful trip to whatever winery they go on a trip to with their friends, family, groups of friends or whatever, and saying, do you have any natural wine? Or if they're not doing that, they're saying, what's in this wine? Or if not doing that, they're saying, do you have a pet nat? If they're not doing that, they're saying, do you have an orange wine? And every time that question gets asked through that matrix of things, it's being fed back into the winemaking community of that place. And it's being fed back into the viticulturists of that place. And it's a resonance that asks people to rethink the way they have actions around what they do. And so I think that for me, that's the future in a small essence. I can talk about hybrid drinks that are like alcoholic kombuchas or, crushable sodas that have alcohol in them, or using indigenous ingredients in gins or whatever. But for me, the greatest resonance is the questioning of a public that is slightly engaged to provoke those that they engage with in terms of their wine consumption, to ask people to do better because they feel that's a value system. I think that's the most important thing that we've done.
Fucking hoorah.
It's a fucking great
We can't go
I
out.
practiced that like
We
10
can't go
times.
out. No, we can't go out on a higher bang than that. Boys,
Should we wrap it up?
the only reason we're going to wrap it up is because
with the
we've
good
got...
and the bads of that,
Of course,
because
yeah.
obviously there is a
There's exactly. There's those
No.
that are conspicuous.
George, what's Giorgio's answer to that question?
My answer
What are the
is-
things? What are the things that's most exciting? What are the things that you're most hopeful about? Giorgio?
Well, I have to say one of the reasons why we stopped Rootstock was exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
Was people trying to get in shoes that don't belong to them.
Mm.
Using these as a marketing tool.
Exactly. So, and I mean, fuck, if we can make big companies to produce organically, hurrah. But in the other end, it's like, you know, like, it's what I was talking about before, you know, like, yes, maybe some company will do that, but some other company will maybe don't change much and just make some of the wines to look quirky and
100%.
natural, you know. And also, you know, the other thing as well is that pretty much, like I would say, like 60% of the production now is organic. Like a lot of people convert to organic, but organic is, I don't know, it's not necessarily that good. You know, like sometimes certification for organic is not necessarily too good. Like they can still harvest by machine. They can still harvest by machine. They can still.
Organic stops at the cellar door. So
Yeah,
organic
but-
certification.
But even so, like
You can have high yield,
even with grain,
industrially- exactly.
even with grain, it's incredible because a lot of grain company, and now I know I'm going out of the topic, but they converted
No,
to
it's part of it.
organic, but they started to work the soil so much, and in an environment with Australia that just doesn't work, like brings the soil to desert, like so it's not just producing organic because there is a demand for it, and like an example is as well, a lot of people from Italy and France now they seeking organic certification because like the Northern Europe is a big market for them and they require organic certification
Yeah.
to sell their products in the venue. So like we need to put everything into context. So like organic is good, yes, but like it's
Can you
it's
give us
about
an example of
agriculture.
what good organics are for you and what bad organics are for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, like it's like I just tell you that most of the people I work with, and I know that what they're doing is amazing because I've been there. They decided to not certify organic because it's a big machine. It's a big commercial machine. And
The organic machine is.
Well, it's philosophical and financial decision.
yeah,
But
exactly.
you guys are
It is
talking
not
about
necessarily good.
certification rather than the farming
Exactly, yeah.
methodology.
Well, I think when you say organic, you need to refer to a certification. So if you say something is organic, it needs to be certified. If you say something is biodynamic, you need to say it's certified, I think. Then there is people that go behind that, but they decide not to certify. But that the only way we can know that is by go and visit them and all of that and pass the message. So that's why for me it's more important that, as an example, people that buy from me, they know that I visit people and I only import certain type of product with a certain standard.
Regardless of whether they're
of
certified or
certification.
not.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, like it's a bit of a, like again, in some cases it's fantastic, but in other cases it's not that great.
It's an interesting idea, right? And I know we're getting, like, we were just trying to wrap it up, but I think
Sure.
that we were. You've just scratched the surface
I want
of
to
something.
beat Luke Burgess' conversation.
Yeah, 4 hours. 4 hours. Yeah.
Fuck, you
All we
guys
need to do is,
I'm
like,
in.
Provide Valium for people out there.
No,
Talk.
we are the Valiant for the people out there.
Yeah.
Just do
They-
episodes.
Believe me, they just put a fucking AirPod in and they're asleep after 25 seconds of listening to either of our voices.
My chocolatey, sexy voice.
That is not Luke Burgess.
Let's break it
sexy
down in
chocolate.
6 episodes.
Yeah, sexy
The-
chocolate voice.
The idea that organics is separate from natural winemaking is such an integral distinction.
It's so easily described. Organic stops at the winery door.
But even biodynamic.
All of it, of course. It
You
stops
guys
at the
are
winery door.
arguing.
No, we're in love.
I don't know what I'm saying. What I'm saying is
People
Paint
new
us
to
a
that.
picture.
No,
Do you want us to
no.
argue? Let's talk about other stuff.
no.
Doesn't hate me anymore.
See, See you, Kenny.
Can I get a workable?
Literally, you're the best thing about this whole thing. Have a good night, Kenny. See
Don't
ya.
go. Yeah, whatever, Kenny. Oh, I agree. I tried to wrap it up, but when I fucking fell off the fucking stage.
Kenny's going to make some compost.
Yeah. But I think a good workable idea is a definition between certification and practice.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
So
organic
give me-
and biodynamic certification stops
versus practice.
for the most part, not always, but for the most part, stops at the cellar door. And then even after the cellar door, if they are certified in organic or biodynamic production in the cellar, there are checks and balances that allow a liberty of things that can be utilized to produce a wine to make it homogenous enough to produce it globally. So, of course, there are big brands that are in supermarkets that are organic certified that come to a winery, and then after that, all sorts of shit's chucked in. And even if they're certified beyond that into the cellar itself, there's all sorts of stuff that are permissible by organic certification that are permissible too. So the litmus test here really is go talk to your wine merchant, go talk to your restaurant.
No, see, I think that's a
and
cop-out.
ask about where does it come from, how's it made?
I think that's the cop out. I think
It's not a cop out. If you go to a butcher and you look at two chicken breasts next to each other and you talk about the
Yeah, one will say free range and the other will say won't. Or
So
the
ask-
other one will
ask-
say organic and the other one won't. Well, I think the cop out is where you get two natural wines that are certified organic, but one's certified organic and the other one's organic in practice, but it's both of it certified, but one is treated from root to the fruit the same in natural practices that you're talking about. And the other ones are the ones that they've got the certification, they've got the tick, and everyone knows the difference. If you go to P&V, for example, we might sell both. But if you're really concerned about it, we'll go, well, X.
That's why
takes
we
it.
serve in front of the counter to talk, tell people, educate.
But these are the differences that I think matter. The fact
there's no cop
is
out.
that-
It's
no,
like educate.
There is no solution for that at the moment. Like,
None.
you know,
None.
At the moment, it's like natural wine doesn't mean anything.
There's,
I mean,
there's
it-
interesting
for me-
cases right
for
now.
That's what
it
pisses
means
me off the
something,
most
but it
about the
doesn't.
term natural wine, right? The thing that pisses me off the most about the term natural wine is the fact that natural wine means whatever you want it to be. If you say, I've got an orange wine
Not
on the
now.
menu,
No, I think less now. If you look
I
at
think
if you
more
look-
now than ever.
No, yes, of course, there is a bandwidth which includes way too many people, but the narrowing of the bandwidth has occurred with, in France now, vin nature being defined by an AOC. Now we have a definition to show around the world, and although it might not suit all the producers we work with, it is literally something you can show to people and say, here is a definition if you want one. Because everyone says...
Yeah, but that doesn't infiltrate the
Doesn't
inner
matter.
west.
Doesn't matter. My definition is very different to the definition from France. But that definition from France has now changed the scope of wine on earth to say, finally, for all those old, out of touch, incongruous
Eric
people...
Asimov.
No, Eric Asimov is down with it. He's a legend. He's a fucking legend. But all the people who naysay now have a yardstick, which is now AOC defined in France. And if they want to argue with us, the Jakes, the Kennys, the Giorgios, and the Mikes about what natural wine is, we can now go, okay, so there's no definition of natural wine? Yes, there is. In France, now there is. Vin nature is now defined. Go and look at that. That's the definition. If you fall under it, you're great. It might not be to our taste, but now there is one that's like ratified by a country on earth that has a timeline and definition. You got it.
How do you guys feel about that?
I'm okay with
that
it because
definition.
to
How do
me,
you feel about it, Giorgio?
It doesn't necessarily describe all that Giorgio and I drink, or you and
No,
Penny
no, no,
drink.
no, but how
at
do
the
you
same
feel
time, it
about
says like, fuck you people who say there's no definition. Now there is one. Enjoy
Do you guys
it.
agree with it though, Giorgio? Like,
No,
No,
for
not
me,
at all.
for me, there is only one definition of natural wine. For me, like my definition of natural wine is a wine that is only got it's coming from organic farming, so no chemicals in the vineyard, and absolutely no addition whatsoever at any stage. That's for me a natural wine.
And I agree with that, but I like the fact that there's a definition that you can shove in people's faces and say, here it is. Because the naysayers will say, oh, I don't like natural wine. It's like, well, the umbrella that encompasses natural wine will encompass a lot of wines you do like and you deify, right through to the stuff that we find interesting and engaging.
Because Capilano, who you represent, right?
Yeah.
They're not natural wine in that definition that you just gave.
100%.
Not in my definition. No.
Not in his definition.
No.
Sure, but they still
But-
are under the banner of.
Oh, mate, let's be honest. They are, without doubt, some of the greatest wines.
Absolutely.
And through most non-militant versions of natural wine, the greatest exponents of natural winemaking in the world.
Yeah.
They are.
Same with Domaine del Romney, Conti, and Burgundy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The most
100%.
expensive wines on earth are natural, theoretically. That's okay. Invite them into the umbrella. Invite them to show.
Well, they
people
give strength to the umbrella.
Well, they invite people to question their conversations around natural wine. Because if they think everything's an agricultural product that's wild and crazy and weird and not to their taste, it's not necessarily doing service to what we're trying to do, which is embrace agriculture, backdrop of where the wines come from, and the theoretical input of people who create those things. Everything's about intent. Intent is the most important thing in wine because intent says, when do we pick? How do we trellis?
Yes.
How do we organize our farm?
Yes.
Intent says, do we want to make an orange wine from this white grape? Do we want to make a white grape? Do we want to press off? Do we want to keep on skins? Intent says, do we want to make a rosé from red grapes? Intent says, do we want to make a heavy red, light red? Intent is everything. Intent is the most important part of terroir.
Wow.
The definition
You're
of-
giving me fucking goosebumps because this is the fucking levels within levels and the fires within fires that winemaking is.
But that's why you have to investigate. If you love cars, you love the engine of a...
But it's
This is a weird...
wine is people.
Yeah, I mean, wine
But
people.
wine is people.
It's in, yeah, you can...
As
exactly.
much as terroir.
Integrity, I suppose.
100%.
Like as much, if no more, of terroir. It's people.
Terroir,
It's people.
is a level within the
The
level.
first intervention
the
in
fire
wine
within
is
the
the
fire.
human decision to do something. Even
Yeah.
if you plant something, that's the first intervention. And the
100%.
biggest interventions in Australia have been putting fucking grapes in the ground where they don't belong. In many respects. And they don't grow
Sounds
well.
so woke right now.
And if you think about how well, that's right. If you think about a lot of the wines that are produced in Australia, the need to manipulate is only exacerbated by the fact that people who planted them there didn't think about where they were growing it.
yeah, of course.
But now, in the last 20 years, people are being cleverer about agriculture and going, what will suit here that you
Same
don't need
deal
to
in
do shit
France
to?
though, but just by a magnitude of 1,000 years.
But that's it. But they do have it right. In many respects, they have it right. If you
Well,
Yeah,
they
but we
have
got
right.
no. But we got the.
they don't have it perfect.
We got the history. We got the history.
And the history...
So it's
and-
like
and-
it's like if you think about it, like here the oldest.
But they worked out what worked.
What's the oldest? 150 years. Like
yeah, to 200, whatever it
to
might be.
200,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Like you think of France or you think of Italy, you're talking thousands.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh,
like
for sure.
And the
So
thing
it's
is
like
that
they put the right thing in the right place, and
yeah, exactly.
then
You've gotta remember that
obviously
places
there is
like-
Well,
area.
actually, what they did was they put the wrong things in the wrong
That's right.
place, and they worked out what didn't work,
work.
and that's what
but for
defined
sure,
what
but
did
that's
work.
it. Exactly.
But they've had hundreds of years to work it out.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Now
But
Australia's-
also vines is not like making wine comes from traveling. So it's like, and Italy for me is the quintessence of that. You think of a plate of spaghetti with tomato and basil. None of these ingredients is from Italy.
Yeah,
What?
Wheat is not Italian. Tomato not coming from Italy. Basil is not coming from Italy.
yeah.
But they put it together. So it's like, and vines is the same thing. They coming from all over
That's
the
such
world.
a beautiful thing. you're
Traveling
saying.
with people, and there's nothing wrong about that.
I think that's such a beautiful, actual. There's a quintessence to what you're saying. It doesn't deny its innate Italian. It's the Italian. Like it is so quintessentially
The Italian were always been
but
travelers.
they're not. But those things they never came together like they did in Italy. But it's only through the lens of 500 years of
But that's it.
distance that allows people to actually go, oh yeah, it's Italian. But it's not.
Here, so not to be cunt, I think there's definitely a chapter 2 in this for sure.
Yeah, but let's just keep plowing through. No jokes.
Yeah, because we could
Right.
just keep talking
Are we
about
coming
each
back
other
next week?
and just getting drunk. and
Kenny,
drunker.
we've got another 17 minutes to beat Luke Burgess.
No, it's fine. I think we're good. We're there. It was a beautiful conversation. I think there's definitely more in it, and we can. There's so much. Like we said, we just spoke about it. There's layers and layers and fires within fires.
What are the fires?
Oh, shut the fuck up.
17 minutes, we've got to beat Luke Burgess.
No, we're not gonna do it. Stop it, seriously.
He
17
spent,
minutes,
you know, he
come on.
spent 15 minutes talking about Dirk Demure, so we got
There's
fucking.
50 minutes of silence. Probably.
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's,
Philip Glass.
It was absolutely astonishingly beautiful and really great to get to know you at deeper levels than we have, even though we've known each other for like 7-8 years, almost 8 years. It was fucking outstanding, and I can't wait to have you back and.
Next week.
We'll start again from ground zero and then get to like 2 hours, 17 minutes shy of Luke Burgess's one again. Second
We'll
time.
never beat him!
But then we'll beat him. We'll beat him if you can add them together.
I'll tell you what we're going to beat him at.
Jesus Christ.
Heaps of fucking cocaine after this fucking podcast.
What?
Cut.
Love you.
Cut.
Love you.
Thanks, guys.
Small agricultural farms.